All right, welcome to Literarily.
Like literarily.
Like literally. Like
Like
literally.
literally. I'm Riley from Riley Tries Hobbies.
I'm Alicia.
And I am Alexis, better known as Momo from Momo's Bookshelf.
And welcome to our 1 year episode. We have been recording Like Literarily for officially 1 year now. Wild. Woo! Season 2. Whoop whoop. And in honor of this being a podcast about three millennials using books as escapism, we're taking it back to our roots by discussing Twilight, but not exactly Twilight. We are talking gender reverse Twilight, aka Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined by Stephanie Meyer. If you are like most 30-ish-year-olds, when these books came out and then eventually the movies, Twilight was a series every preteen and teen was obsessed with. And I mean, it is still a huge pop culture phenomenon.
Also, can we take a moment to recognize that Stephanie wrote the same book 3 times? I've read them all, but she wrote Twilight. She wrote Twilight from Edward's perspective, and she wrote Twilight gender swapped. Wild, just blatant cash grab. But you do you, girl.
Yeah, I mean, Steph literally apologized in the foreword for not releasing Midnight Sun, the book from Edward's perspective, which is, now out years later. But she said she didn't feel like there was enough time and only planned on writing 1 or 2 chapters of Life and Death. However, she said it was not only fun, but also really fast and easy. So she finished writing the whole thing. Cough, cash grab, cash grab. But yeah, wild.
Ironically enough, because I've obviously also read all three at this point, I just remember there being pieces of Midnight Sun that I felt like were more inspired by Rob Pattinson as Edward rather than just Edward as the original character that she wrote back in 2005 when it was originally published. But, it's fine. But, speaking of Twilight, if you aren't familiar with the storyline of Twilight, we're just gonna get a little brief synopsis of what happened during the original Twilight so you can kind of gauge a difference of what happened during the gender swap version. So obviously, before we get started, a reminder that Twilight obviously is pretty well known at this point, from the book to the movie to its spin-offs and everything else in between. So this episode will obviously contain spoilers. So if you haven't at least read or even watched Twilight, definitely recommend turning this off for now, borrowing it from your local library, off your millennial friend's bookshelf, buying it if you want, and coming back and tuning in. And then the ending of Life and Death's storyline will obviously also contain some big spoilers as well. So if you have no issue with us spoiling that for you, if you haven't read it yet, then feel free to continue listening and let's head into the episode. So to recap, Twilight is girl moves from Phoenix, Arizona to Forks, Washington. Girl meets this boy. Boy turns out to be a vampire. Girl and vampire fall in love. Vampire clan and girl play baseball. Girl becomes bad vampire target. The vampire clan hides her. Girl runs off. Well, sneaks off, rather. And her plan goes terribly wrong. Vampire clan saves her. And then the girl and vampire boyfriend go to the prom. And that was Twilight, essentially.
Just
So,
minus the werewolves.
yeah, well, they don't really come until New Moon anyways.
That's
Yeah,
fair,
that's
that's fair. So the gender reversed version is essentially the exact same thing with some little differences sprinkled in. So in Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined, instead of the girl Bella moving to Phoenix, we have a boy that moves from Phoenix to Forks. He meets a quote unquote girl who, wow, turns out to be a vampire, and they fall in love. They still go through the same big climax where they go to play baseball, and this alternative vampire clan that has a more conventional lifestyle shows up, and the woman Tracker becomes obsessed with the boy, and so the boy is hidden by his bae and her family, and he decides to make the same stupid decision and sneaks off. But this time, he does it a little sooner than the girl had done it in Twilight. And so when this plan is going very badly, Bay can't make it as quickly, and so he's injured to the point that death is actually unavoidable. So this time, the boy becomes a vampire. And the last chapters into the epilogue are what Twilight could have become if Edward had changed Bella that day.
So before we get started into the differences of Twilight versus Life and Death, let's be real here. This is huge pop culture. Who was Team Edward and who was Team Jacob? You know, big questions back in the day when we were like 15. Personally, I was Team Emmett. He was honestly just like that manly yet teddy bearish kind of guy, and then he like let Rosalie be this like baddie, but he knew that he would kill, but she knew that he would kill for her, and she like let him take that, you know, more quote unquote like manly macho role on for her. And I just honestly love that, which is probably why I'm a huge fan of enemies to lovers and morally gray male main characters now. So yeah, I was the opposite. I was not team Emmett or Team Edward or Team Jacob. But what were you guys?
Oh, I had the biggest crush on Taylor Lautner when I saw these movies. So I was definitely Team Jacob. Granted, it would have made way more sense. Like, everybody knew she was going to pick Edward in the end, but I don't know. Taylor Lautner's bae. And even when I read these before they came out, I still loved Jacob as a character. Total Team Jacob. Total, mostly Team Taylor Lautner.
I would say I was definitely Team Taylor Lautner, but like for the books, I didn't feel very strongly in either direction, but they were so set up to be Edward that like if it would have been Jacob, I would have just been like, what are you doing, Stephanie? What is going on? But they both kind of suck, and you realize that even more with the rereads. If you dive into those spin-off worlds.
Yeah, maturity is rereading Twilight at, almost 30 and being like, wow, these are terrible people.
This is my pitch to you, Stephanie Meyer. If you ever listen to like literally do a spin-off where Bella ends up with Jacob.
I would read that New Moon. I would.
Well, Riley, want to go ahead and kick us off with the most obvious difference?
Oh, yes, I can. So the most obvious difference is the genders. Steph quite literally gender swapped every single character except for Renee and Charlie because, and I quote, I have a really hard time believing that any judge at that time or even now would give a child to a transient unemployed father over a mother with a steady job and strong ties to her community. End quote. I mean, she's not wrong, but she could have figured something out to swap them, and this just plays further into gender roles. But anyway, she also left the Volturi the same genders. She was also wicked creative with changing some of the names and not creative at all with others. So going through what she changed. So Bella is Bo, Edward is Edith, Alice is Archie, Rosalie is Royal. I don't know what the heck kind of name that was.
That one killed me. Like, what in the hell was that?
Yeah,
like,
that was
that's
rough.
not a name. That's not a name. And like Ross would have made much more sense. Anyway, whatever. Carlisle is Corrine. Esme is Ernest. Jasper is Jessamine. Like, that's an extra ass name, Steph.
It could have just been Jess. Like,
yeah. Emmett was Eleanor. Jacob was Jules. Samueli was Samueli. Eric was Erica. Paul was Paula. Victoria was Victor. Laurent was Lauren. James was Joss. I'm surprised she didn't pick Jamie for that one. And then Quill was Quill. So she was like pretty creative with like, the vampire fam. And then when it came to everybody else, she was like, yeah, Eric's gonna be Erica.
She was like, yeah, these humans don't matter.
But at that point, like, she could have just changed Bella and Bo and kept everybody else the same. But she instead decided to change everybody and not Charlie and Renee. Just so interesting.
Yeah, those ones would have taken a lot more thought.
yeah, definitely because, in the brief introduction that she did that Riley pulled the quote from obviously gave like the breakdown of kind of what inspired her like to keep them the same. And I obviously understand, but at the same time, like it would not have been difficult to take 5 more minutes to contemplate how you could have made that work Renee became a guy and Charlie became the mom. And her name could have changed, and the mom name could have changed, could have stayed Charlie. Like, but to continue with more general or like vague points past the genders, essentially the other main differences were that the way the intro happens between Bo and Edith was a little different. The way that he tells her that he knows that she's a vampire was different. The conversation, it takes place in the car, and the main difference was is that this conversation between Bella and Edward took place in the forest, but it was after the whole ordeal in the car where they like kind of got to know each other a little bit more and stuff. But this time, instead of interrupting that and like pushing it off another day or so, they just had the conversation in the car. And then the scene in Port Angeles went from like sketchy dudes trying to assault Bella to Bo essentially walking in onto something sketchy and them trying to kill him instead. And then the context of Bo meeting Edith's family was switched from a more spontaneous meeting to something to something more spontaneous rather than the more formal greeting like with Edward and Bella. Like they were literally eating breakfast and she was like, "Want to go see my parents?" and he was like, "Sure." And then I did actually appreciate the main difference to introduce what would have eventually become the werewolf storyline, which was that Jules, aka Jacob, told Bo that the Quillette legends or told him about the Quillette legends like way more directly than Jacob's version with Bella. Like with Bella, he kind of like alluded to it was just a story, they tell it on the campfire, like kind of vibe. It's just a traditional thing. But with Jules, I think she spoke about it like a lot more directly. Like they say this is true, but I don't actually know. And that kind of started him to push the thought of him thinking, oh, the possibility of me thinking that Edith is a vampire like could be true.
Jules was just like, this shit is so crazy. I'm just going to tell you up front, like, these people actually believe this.
Yeah, like I feel like that's how any teenager would tell the story. They'd be like, "Yeah, so here's all of the tea, but by the way, this is just outrageous, right? Like I don't know why they believe it." Ha 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 ha. And then like, but Jacob took it so seriously and was like, "You can't tell anybody." And like, this is what they say. And it was like, "Okay, bro." Like cuz from his perspective, that mean it gave more of an allusion to the fact that Jacob believed it slightly more than Jules did. Like Jules was like, "Ha ha ha, that's so funny." Like, who could believe something like that versus Jacob, the way that like he had emphasized to Bella made it sound like somewhere in the back of his mind he kind of knew it might have been true. So I thought that that was interesting in like the context of how they told that story to each of the main characters. What else did you guys notice that maybe I didn't hit?
I know that like a bunch of the backstories were a little different. So Corinne slash Carlisle's story, Corinne didn't lead a group into the sewers, like to go kill them and whatnot, but her father was trying to kill the vampires. So Corinne was changed to punish her dad essentially to become what her dad hated most. It was like very vengeful. And her dad was then murdered while she was changed, and she basically had to watch. I thought this was a much better backstory, actually. I thought it was very, I don't know, it meant more than Carlisle's running through the sewers trying to kill a vampire and then becomes what he hates most. Like, it was more like revengeful when it was like about the dad, you know? And then Esme slash Ernest story was a little different. In like Twilight, Edward killed Esme's husband and her daughter dies at like 2 years old. In Life and Death, Ernest's alcoholic wife jumps off the cliff with their 2-year-old daughter, and she gets a name. It's Grace. And then Ernest jumps after them. And then, so that's his backstory. And then, let's see. All right, the Volturi story is also different. So, in the original one, the Volturi, Arrow's like the guy or whatever, and that's like not the case in Life and Death. Arrow ends up getting killed off. But Sulpicia was had a vampire servant named Melee, who is a new character, who would steal and had the power to steal and transfer another vampire's gifts. When they encounter a vampire with more advanced gifts, then the Volturi steals it and gives it to or the melee steals it and then gives it to a Volturi instead of like the Volturi person being replaced as somebody more powerful is discovered. And Sulpicia was also a witness to Arrow's sister's murder, and she delivered him to Marcus, and then Melee stole Arrow's gifts in order to govern the Volturi. And then Caius was also executed for, Aro and Caius like murdering Aro's sister. So basically, Aro doesn't exist in this universe, and the Cullens and the Volturi are less like intense with each other because the Volturi aren't trying to steal Alice and Edward's gifts. And then the big one is the change that like basically leads to the different ending for Bo is he's able to escape or sneak away from Archie and Jessamine like 5 minutes earlier than Bella was able to in the airport. So that changes a lot in the ending. So when you skip forward to the ballet studio scene, side note, Renee worked at the ballet studio. Bo didn't take lessons at the ballet studio. I'm just saying Bo totally could have taken ballet lessons. Anyway, Edith was basically determined to suck Joss's venom out of Bo's system to prevent him from being a vampire, but despite her effort, the venom would already reach too deep, and Bo had to choose basically between becoming a vampire or dying. And Bo got the choice, and he decided to become a vampire. Meanwhile, in Twilight, Edward was like so reluctant to attempt to suck the venom out because he didn't want to like kill her.
So like, I think the big question here is, why did Stephanie Meyer rewrite this entire book with the gender swapped? And she pretty much said she did this because she was receiving a lot of criticism on how Bella was too much of your old-fashioned, stereotypical, I'm a damsel in distress. And she was also getting a lot of kickback on just how prevalent the gender norms were. And so she was like, hey, look, I can swap all the genders and show you that this book still works. But I don't know if I really believe that. I don't feel like this book actually made her point or like refuted that in any way. And like you can use like the little examples, like Riley even just said, like Bo didn't take ballet. Like what boy would be taking ballet as a child? No, his mom worked at the ballet studio. And so that's just why he knew it was right around the corner from the house. But like it also is really, it feels pretty clear in more serious ways throughout the rewrite as well. And one of those, as Alexis was just chatting about, is that when Bo is off in Port Angeles, he's like approached by like a group of people. And the group of people are like very explicitly saying they're going to try to kill Bo, that they have a gun, and like there's a lot more assertion of all this physical violence to make Bo feel like he's in like this risky place versus like Riley, you reread Twilight while you were reading this. Like it's never alluded, it's alluded to but never explicitly said like what's happening, what could potentially happen to Bella when she's in Port Angeles. Like we're all just like, yeah, she's a woman who's alone in the streets at night. Like sexual assault is what is being alluded to the entire time. And so it's just, we're already beginning to see that Stephanie couldn't just like swap these characters. Like we see the same thing where the sexual assault is removed from Rosalie's backstory. It's a generalized assault case. And I mean, we can even use, again, as Riley was just pointing out, like Corinne was not the vampire hunter. Like she was the woman. She wasn't the one going after the vampires. So it just felt like this really blaring to me. Like you can't just swap the genders because there are societal norms and expectations being played into in that first author writing of Twilight. So like we can accept that they're there. Like not every book is going to like push societal or like cultural norms. And yeah, Twilight played into some of those. And I felt like the other really important thing about this was that maybe this is something I see a lot in books, but also TV shows, of whether or not like sexual assault is being used as a plot point rather than like something meaningful. And the fact that like Stephanie could just trade out that assault case into a more generalized assault case kind of shows that there was a little bit of shock factor being used there for the sexual assault that was being written in.
I
You got
guess
it.
before we move on, I just wanted to point out there was other things just like that weren't changed or were changed that probably didn't need to be changed. Like Bo was very self-conscious about getting on Edith's back to like run through the forest and stuff, even though she was a vampire, like she could obviously carry him anywhere. Um and then I know Bo was described as like more OCD and less angry than Bella by Stephanie, and that's also just weird. Like they could have had the same. It seemed like unnecessary change, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, that was an excellent point to bring up, and I agree with Alicia. Like it definitely almost proved against the point that she was trying to make 100%. And with that, going into the similarities, like even the similarities, despite them essentially being supposedly the same, they're still slightly different because of the fact that like Stephanie switched this character to a guy and then the love interest to a girl and what that kind of brings. So, for example, the group of friends that Bo makes is literally the same, but swap everybody out. So, like, instead of Mike, Tyler, and Eric, they become Michaela, Taylor, and Erica. Um, then from the book, Lauren became a Logan. Lauren didn't make the movie, so if you've only ever seen the movies, you're not gonna know who that is. But ironically, it kind of annoyed me with how, because they were girls, like we all know the storyline with how Bella ends up having to reject Eric, Tyler, and Mike at some point throughout the whole entire series. But when they took it, like, sure, were they like wounded puppies a little bit, but they took it decently well. I don't think it really ever severely impacted their relationship. But with the three girls that Bo had to reject, she made them more catty. And I was like, I guess I understood the point that you were trying to make, but also you're supposedly saying these are supposed to be the same characters, just gender swapped. So why couldn't the three girls handle the rejection? Slightly wounded egos, but make it work, and remain friends with him versus getting a little bit more catty about it and almost kind of like turning against each other a little bit. So that was a little annoying. And then, yeah, Lauren, instead of just being kind of like standoffish and um catty from the books, like Logan was just kind of a douchebag. And you could tell he was kind of like the asshole of the group, I guess. And then the dynamic between Bo, despite the fact that Renee and Charlie stayed the same versus Bella, was done decently well. And it felt familiar because obviously Renee and Charlie as a personality didn't change. Like they stayed the exact same. But the fact that he was a son versus a daughter ultimately was going to change some of the underlying tones. How a mom acts towards a son or how a dad acts towards a son is, society, like speaking of society, like that's gonna change how they handle the relationship. Um, and so I thought that was really interesting. Like similarly, Charlie was very um what's the word, like separated, I guess, from Bo, just like he was with Bella. But when it came to conversation about Bo telling Charlie about the girls, that like the fact that he was interested in Edith, it wasn't like, oh, let me put my shotgun because I'm a cop dad. Like, because it's a son and not a daughter. Like my dad made that joke 101 times, but if I was a guy, I highly doubt my dad would have ever made that joke. So those were some of the things that, even though, like to Alicia's point, supposedly was supposed to be the same, it still honestly kind of had like underlying differences. So, um, but I know Riley said that she did like the tandem read. So how did you kind of notice some of the same things?
I noticed kind of the same things, but I also like listening to the two books back and forth between each other. It was clear how similar the stories were. Like a lot of things were literally just search and replace in Word with names. And I would get confused sometimes with like, did I read this chapter already? Or did I listen to this chapter already? Like I could swear I just listened to this exact verbiage. And it really was. It just, switched the names out. Some of the differences I was able to pick up on like easier, like the Esme and Ernest change, or like the Royal and Rosalie one was big because I think in Twilight, Rosalie doesn't like talk about her backstory until one of the later books. But in this one we got Royal's backstory a lot sooner. But it still like was hard to keep track of like which book I had already read that chapter for because they were so similar. It was like wild.
So
Honestly, you can
going
probably like listen to all of Twilight until the last 4 chapters, and you'd still figure out what was happening very easily.
Absolutely. I definitely think that's gonna that kind of hints towards some of our thoughts and opinions about how this gender swap version as we start to close out the episode. So to round everything out, um of course, as you guys know, if you've been listening for the last year, we also like to kind of talk about what we liked or disliked because of course, art is subjective. And so, personally speaking, somehow having Bella become Beau made the main character point of view more tolerable, but also somehow more cringe. And I feel like this is where Alicia has quite a lot to say.
I've got some thoughts. So pulling that pin back down off the pegboard. So like somehow I feel like he was an even more annoying main character personally. Like I thought Bella was a little bit too obsessive about Edward, but Beau like feels like he's taking it to a whole nother level. But then if we're actually thinking about his characteristics in comparison to Bella and like thinking about this is a gender swapped version, um, it does seem to almost help make a number of those characteristics less annoying because of how they're introduced, which I think goes towards saying she kind of failed with this gender swapped version. Because like Bella's clumsy, oh, because she's just a clumsy girl. Well, Beau's not just clumsy, he's clumsy because he went through a growth spurt and he's trying to work through puberty. Or like Bella pretty consistently has like insecurities, is pretty insecure in herself in comparison to like a lot of others. And we don't really have this thread so much with Beau. In fact, he feels pretty judgmental throughout the entire book. Like he's really judging Charlie. He's judging the 3 girls that are coming after him. He's like judging everybody else, just like in high school, it really feels like. And so it's like, okay, I don't really need to listen to this boy just complain about literally every other character in this series, and particularly when they're really not that relevant anyway. And then on top of that, he's now a boy, so like all of a sudden he can't like speak flowery. I can't even say that word out loud. He can't speak like flowery prose. I think that was like a term Stephanie once used to describe like how Bella speaks to Edward throughout the Twilight series, is at least like occasionally you get these really nice quotes out of the dialogue. That's just gone. There's Beau just says whatever comes to mind, and it's just out there in the universe.
Yeah, he's definitely not like eloquent at all speaking. He's also worried about like hurting Edith, which is annoying after like the 3rd time she says, "You can't hurt me." Like, stop worrying about that. Like, just jump on her back. Obviously, nobody cares. She's a vampire. She's super strong, whatever. And then, I don't know, just her describe, like, going back to her, Stephanie describing him as more OCD and not angry, but the love story is the same. Like, no, he's just being kind of an ass and aloof. Like, I want more emotion out of you, Beau. Give me something. Also, boys can write poetry. Like, who cares about the flowery pose? It would be fine. And I don't know. It was just interesting. The OCD thing kind of annoyed me. I know that was like thrown around more often in 2015, but that's also not the vibe I got from him. Like,
Oh no, he was not OCD.
no,
Like that
like
was just
it
a
was like
misuse of the disorder throughout the entire book.
100%.
yeah, like it didn't make any sense. I don't know. I don't know about this one, Steph.
Yeah, I mean, ironically enough, like I have to remind myself that Stephanie Meyer is pretty Mormon, so a lot of her male characters are written pretty much exactly the same with like that very traditional male, like conservative role in the back, like in the back of her mind, I think. So it's like, okay, I understand that the point is that all men are supposed to be very gentleman-like, but okay, that's not realistic. Like, this is America. Like, she was going to, Bo slash Bella were going to a public school. Not everybody was Mormon. Like,
There's one point in Twilight where one of the people I follow on Instagram, she talks about this a lot. It's Sarah Elizabeth like underscore talks, but she talks about how they're dressed so strangely by how Stephanie Meyer describes them. And Bella's wearing like a long khaki skirt and like a blue button down top. And Edward says something along the lines of like, "Oh, you tempt me so." And I was just like, "Oh my gosh, that's so weird." And then in Life and Death, she does like the same thing, but very strange, very Mormon wardrobe taste, which isn't a bad thing. It's just looking at it now, like I didn't notice this in middle school, but I absolutely notice it now, and I think it's hilarious.
and Forks is not even in Washington, really, is not even a Mormon dominant state. So to write from the perspective that everybody came from a background like that was just so random. Like, it just didn't seem very realistic.
I'm going to circle back to something Riley said like a minute or so ago. So I've got one more tangent on this gender swapped, and then I'll stop.
Go
But
for it, Alicia. I love your tangents. They're 10 out of
thank
10.
you. It's on Edith's character. So like Riley was just saying, like there's multiple times Bo's like, you can't lift me, you're a girl. And like Edward had like this possibility of like, oh, he could be a little bit abnormally strong because he's a boy. That's expected from the boy. But like it was so overplayed how Edith, I think this existed in Twilight too, but once again, there's like a whole paragraph dedicated to how Edith is like a skeleton. Like you can see her collarbones popping out. Like she's so small and frail. How could she ever be able to lift all of these heavy things? Like it's so overplayed to the fact that Bo's just like, I don't even find her a little bit scary. Like Bella, even at one point in Twilight, at least says like, I don't find you any scarier than like you should be. Like, I don't know, there's some acknowledgement that like maybe there's a little bit of underlying tension of fear. Bo's just like, nope, this is just a little girl. Why would I ever be scared of her? But like, she's a vampire. So that was pretty irritating to me throughout the book. Even so, like, besides Edith, even Emmett's gender swapped parallel, was her name Eleanor? I already forget.
I think
It
so.
was. It was
Okay,
Eleanor.
Eleanor, like they say she's like athletic, but it didn't feel like it was like nearly as played up as Emmett in Twilight with being like his big, strong character. Like she really was very forgettable to me. And I even remembered Emmett from like the first book. I mean, turned out to be Alexis's favorite character.
It
Yeah.
did because he was so funny in the books and it was so played up that he was like the teddy bear on the surface, but or like at heart, but on the surface, like he was like the strong one, the tough one. And even when Bella eventually turned, everybody would like arm wrestle him at like to see because like when you're a newborn, you're the strongest.
And
So
then
they definitely downplayed that.
yeah, and then for the opposite effect, like Archie wasn't like whimsical and delicate and like
Almost fairy
oh
like.
yeah, like fairy like. He was just a man. He was just a man.
Just a man.
Honestly, to stay on topic with all this, the Edward to Edith transition was also really interesting to me. Not just for what you guys have talked about, but for the fact that like Edward's entire personality was on how traditional and like gentlemanly he was. So obviously everybody kind of put two and two together when Stephanie Meyer came out get that she's Mormon. about why Edward had been pushing Bella literally every single book about remaining abstinent until they got married. And he had like these tendencies to do everything for her and all this other kind of stuff. And so it would have been interesting to see like how Edith would have had the conversation about the kids, but from the perspective of being the one who would have to be the carrier, you know, or slash birth giver, and not like Edward being the one to say, I could never like assist in making you a mom or whatever. Like, I wonder how that conversation would have went, but like the whole abstinence conversation went out the window. Like, oh, just because she's a female vampire now and she's like supposedly, you know, got this more independent, like baddie kind of vibe because she, you know, made a bunch of comments about paying for Beau when they went out, and like he kind of had like a male moment about it, and she was like, okay, really? Like, are you seriously gonna be like that right now? It like the conversation of them being absent like couldn't be a conversation anymore just because she was a girl. Or like the fact that I obviously Stephanie Meyer didn't want to focus any kind of conversation with Beau trying to bring it up because I feel like she would have thought that would have been like, oh, that's like every teenage boy in America and like in the world. But you never even really see a narrative of Beau saying anything about it. So ironically, I thought that was kind of strange. Like lack of abstinence conversation. And then Edward was very quick to say, oh, you can never be with me for a long time because I want you to grow old and have kids and do all this stuff. And yet Edith like literally never even brings that up.
Yeah, that storyline also just goes like poof. Like the boys, the men, they can't have regret to like have these future generations of spawn. Like it disappears in Beau's storyline. It disappears in Rosalie's. Like for Royal, he's like sad he didn't get to see his sisters, or he saw his sisters like grow old, I think, and pass away. And so that's like where his trauma comes from versus like Rosalie had really wanted to start a family. Like, nope, that's not something men in this universe apparently can desire or want to discuss. And I think that could have made like this book so much interesting, so much more interesting if Stephanie had really tried to like subvert all of the gender norms that we did see in Twilight. But instead, any of them that had any tension, she just changed the storyline, which I digress, goes back to I don't think she proved her point.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it would have been much more interesting if maybe Edith took on some of Rosalie's regrets, or like Edith took on some of Rosalie's storyline, or better yet, we just left all the same characters except for Bella and Edward, because that would have made a lot more, like, it would have forced like a lot more thought on Stephanie's point, so it would have been much more difficult and not easy, like she said, and easy like she was quoted saying. But even if I don't know, it would have been a much more interesting story. I mean, this is kind of a fanfic, would be if it was like Beau and Rosalie instead of like Beau and Edith. Like, give Rosalie the same backstory and just switch who was like in love with each other. I feel like it would have been a much more interesting story. I don't know.
Also, ironically, I feel like with the gender stuff, not changing any of the vampires and the werewolves and the friends kind of also proved against her point, because it's like, oh, they can't just they can't maintain the same kind of relationships. Like, what year are we in?
Yeah, that's also true.
Like, why couldn't Beau still be best friends with an Alice? Why would that matter? Like, it's the same thing. Why couldn't Beau be friends with Mike and you just maintained, you know, the Angela, Jess, and whatever storyline, and they were the ones that liked Beau instead or whatever, you know?
Yeah, like,
so
what would have Jess done if it was Beau instead of Bella? Like, I don't
exactly.
know.
Would she have?
Granted, they were like foils to each other anyway, like Mike and Jessica or whatever, but still, like, I don't know. It would have been more interesting if she just changed those two.
Exactly. So leading into pretty much the major difference, and as Riley said, if you pretty much read all of Twilight and then switched to Life and Death's like last 4 or 5 chapters, The ending was low-key sad. I think to this day, I read this kind of towards the beginning of August, and it's, mid-August now. I honestly think I'm still trying to decide if I liked the ending or not. I didn't dislike it. I just it really could have been the end of Twilight if Edward had given Bella the opportunity to make the choice for herself, which was to become a vampire or not. And so I really enjoyed it. I just think that it just felt like all four books were put into this like four chapter epilogue pretty much. And so I think I'm still trying to process like how I feel about it, but I did like that she explored such a drastic difference um in comparison to Twilight, and that was something that she did focus on changing. That was probably one of the better changes that I think Stephanie Meyer made.
So hear me out. Despite my rather pessimistic lines of thought throughout this entire episode, I kind of like the ending more. Like, it's a way more realistic timeline. The like entire Twilight series takes place in just under 2 years. And so, like, I feel like they could have changed a little bit more so it wasn't quite identical of a story, but like putting Bo in this truly life or death situation and forcing the change, that transition into a vampire early on, seemed a lot more realistic to me. Even though, they both would have done it for love eventually anyway, because that was still like sickeningly in love for high schoolers and in the like months, not even months that we knew them in this particular book. But anyway, I felt like if Twilight would have ended with Bella being changed, we could have like explored this tension on the relationship of like Edward hadn't wanted her to change, Bella had wanted to change. And like, do they stay together forever? Like, do they really continue to move at the speed that they were moving now that they're like staring down the barrel of like actually forever? So you have like this more natural tension thrown on of like they're suddenly dealing with this really long lifespan, which I feel like adds a really nice dimension of drama and is more fun to explore than like this teenage angst and love of Bella, personally, in my opinion. I mean, maybe that's more now, like reflecting upon it as not reading it as a preteen or teen, as Riley said, was a large portion of the reader base when this book came out. But this would have also required, like Alexis was just saying, we could have removed a lot of that vampire history dump, a lot of that werewolf history dump, while during that transition. Like I would argue there's like two chapters at the end you need to read because like we don't need the whole history of Twilight pared down into this epilogue. And then I think obviously Bo would have needed, or in this case it was Bella, to go with my line of thought through all this, would have needed to be a little less obsessed with Edward to really be able to play out that tension in the relationship for now, like looking down forever. But I don't know. I feel like it had more potential personally.
So, hear me out. I think a really good way forward with this book would be for this to become a TV show on the Sci-Fi Channel. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but the Sci-Fi Channel is a wild place, and I love it, and I just think it would be such a fun show, and it would be so camp, and then after season 1, where they get to the end of this book, they could do whatever the hell they want with the seasons and the storylines after, and then we could see all that stuff that Alicia just said, and I think it would be amazing.
Sold. Where's the Kickstarter?
I know. I'm going to pitch it. I mean, Stephanie Meyer probably needs money at this point. I think she might do it. Like, seriously.
Is it an easy cash grab?
It is an easy cash grab. But anyway.
And honestly, I feel like we could see more about what would happen with Jules rather than Jacob, especially since we never get the introduction in the life or death version of this to Renesmee. So, like, where would not Jacob, but where would like Jules' storyline go?
Look, honestly, it changed for the better.
Oh, 100%.
Like the whole like they could have ended the epilogue at the end of the funeral, but no, we have to go meet Bonnie in the woods. It's so unnecessary. Oh my God.
like at that point, it did not really matter, especially when like who was Bonnie? That was like barely a character in Twilight. I feel like that conversation would have made way more sense if she had incorporated the New Moon storyline somewhere in the middle of this, because that's really when Bella had become a part of the, of the werewolf community. In Twilight, she was literally irrelevant.
Yeah, I don't know. At that point in the story is when I turned it to 2 times speed and just wanted it to be done.
Yeah, it was so dramatic.
It was so dramatic.
So with that comment, Riley, what would you rank this book?
So since I listened to this and Twilight at the same time, and they were laughably similar, I'm gonna give Twilight, the original, a better score of 4, mostly because of nostalgia and no other reason. It's not objectively, it's not a great book, but I love it so much that I can't give it less than that. For Life and Death, a 3.25. And if they make this a show on the Sci-Fi Channel, it's going to be a 10 out of 10, and I will change my mind. However, until that happens, I'm not changing anything. What's your opinion, Alicia?
Yeah, I mean, generally, my opinion is to just read Twilight. Don't read this book.
Don't give Stephanie Meyer any more money.
Yeah, rent it from the library at minimum. I mean, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed again like the 2 chapters at the end that were different, but no, not worth it. Alexis.
Yeah, I gave it about a 3.5 as well. I agree with Alicia. Just go read Twilight. And honestly, I say go read Twilight not to say, oh, this is like the next Shakespeare, but just for the whole sake of pop culture. I mean, Twilight was such a huge pop culture moment in 2010s when the first movie, like the movies were actually coming out, and if you hadn't already read them, people were starting to. And even into now, clearly with like the Midnight Sun coming out, there was like the obviously the gender swapped one that we just read, and then there was the one about Bree Tanner, which was one of the vampires that got turned during Eclipse when Victoria was like going around with Riley and like making a bunch of newborns and stuff. So it's just like such a big piece of being a millennial, honestly. So if you haven't read it or watched the movies, you should. And if you aren't a big movie or a big reader fan, just go listen to Twilight's soundtrack. That's all you needed.
Honestly, I think this is a case where the movie's better than the book.
Yes.
The movie's not great either, but I love the movie. I watch it very often.
The soundtrack made the movie. Like, it just was phenomenal. And for it being so low budget, I mean, they did what they could for the money they were allotted. Like, they did not, I don't think they expected all this to do as well as it had.
All right. So on this note, we're going to do a rapid fire wrap up. In interest of time, I just want to know, Riley, what are you reading?
I just finished Half a Soul and it was great. I haven't picked up another book yet. What about you, Alexis?
I am currently trying to speed finish The Serpent and the Wings of the Night because I have a book club meeting literally today in like an hour, and I'm on page 197.
Fuck.
What about you, Alicia?
I just finished this weekend Hello Beautiful, which was a recommendation from Riley, and it was really, really good. And now I'm starting Station 11, which is another book about a global pandemic for the end of the world.
So with that, next month is episode 14, officially kicking off with this episode our season 2 here at Like Literarily. To continue with pop culture and pop culture icons, something that is being extremely talked about right now is It Ends With Us, the movie that just came out. So we're going to do another book to movie comparison. And honestly, the main reason why is it is gaining a lot of attention between just the Colin Hoover drama as a whole and the common arguments on whether or not that author has a space or should. Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni narrative on the movie and the marketing for the movie, and honestly, just the overall plot itself, because as a trigger warning, the book does touch the topic of domestic violence in relationships. So that is what you have to look forward to. If you haven't watched the movie yet or read the book, It Ends With Us, suggest doing that before we talk next month about it.
Or if somehow we excite you about it, it will probably be available on streaming shortly after that episode. Well, guys, that's all I got.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.